Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight to this presentation from the Barnegat Friends meeting. And I'm very excited. I'm sure we're all excited to have Selden Smith as our speaker tonight. And I think you're all aware that he's the author of the Pendle Hill pamphlet, The Atheist's Guide to Quaker Process, Spirit-Led Decisions for the Secular. And there it is. And he will self-introduce and present and then open it to questions tonight.
Thank you, Agnes. I just have a few minutes of prepared talking, and then we can open up to discussion, which I'm really looking forward to. But I do want to start by thanking everyone for tuning in. Again, I'm Selden Smith. I'm a member of the State College Friends meeting in Central Pennsylvania, I was born and raised in that meeting. I assume you're here because you heard of my Pendle Hill pamphlet, and I know you haven't all read it, and that's okay. I will summarize it a bit so that we can have a discussion of it. But first, if you'll bear with me for a few minutes, I'd like to offer some context for it, my own Quaker background and my spiritual journey. Yes, a non-theist can have a spiritual journey, as I'm sure you've all noticed. And it won't take too long, I hope. As I said, I was raised in a Quaker household. I went to first day school. My parents were among maybe 24 or so couples who formed the core of the State College Friends meeting. If you don't know this, State College is the home of Penn State University, and my dad was one of many faculty who were hired there right after World War II. And they were, he was a Lutheran, she was a Methodist. They were drawn to Quakers by Friends activism, I think. My dad had a bit of a mystical streak, but it was still what the Quakers actually did, I think, that appealed to them, especially the civil rights movement in the 1950s. They were not praying types. My parents, we didn't read the Bible at home. What I know about the Bible, I guess I got in first day school. Praying was fine for other people if it brought them strength. But it was not as satisfying to my folks as just getting on with doing the many things that seemed to need to be done. Things like marching up and down the main street with "ban the bomb" signs. This would have been in the 1950s. I was either not born or too young to be very aware of it. Although my older sister has a theory that they stayed up nights trying to think of ways to embarrass their teenage daughter. My dad led a drive to eliminate the ROTC requirement at Penn State. Not the program, it's fine to have the program, but at the time, it was a requirement for male students. And eventually they did successfully remove that requirement. They ran an integrated summer work camp for teenagers in the segregated South. And they offered a room in their home, half of my room actually, to Black students from Tuscaloosa, Alabama, so that they could attend our town's excellent high school and have a better chance of getting into a good college. One became a doctor, as I recall. And this kind of activism was normal for everyone in our meeting. Everybody's parents did stuff like this. And it was a very tight community. It was a very loving community. I had a roster of spare parents and no lack of playmates from the meeting. And because of these formative experiences and many that followed, I will always love the Quakers. Even if we have a difference of opinion on something that is admittedly pretty basic. When I was 15, despite how loving my home was, I was 15 and I was ready to leave. And I jumped at the chance to go to a Quaker boarding school. Even though it meant that financially, that meant that a private college later on would be out of the question. I was excited to live near the big city of Philadelphia, and only to discover that Westtown, Pennsylvania is the only place that is more rural than State College, but I did not regret it in the slightest. Through the school itself, and even more through the wonderful program called Young Friends, I discovered other teenagers who were asking those questions about life and the universe and everything that you ask when you're a teenager. And it was around then that I first described myself as a Quaker atheist, which I thought was very clever. And it was sophomoric, I admit, but then again, I was a sophomore, so it was okay. After graduating, in my gap year, we didn't call it that then, but I did it. Part of that was a semester that I spent at Pendle Hill. And I encountered a huge variety of Quakers of every kind of profession and persuasion, from diehard Christians to people as non-theistic as myself. And we were in close quarters together. If you've been to Pendle Hill, you know what I mean. And spent many hours together in deep and fruitful conversations, and also just goofing around and having fun. I remember playing volleyball a lot. We had meeting for worship for volleyball after dinner. And there were people there like Parker and Sally Palmer, who I didn't know at the time I was supposed to be impressed by, and John and June Youngblood. I will never regret going when I did, but I was only 18, and I'm sure that I missed an awful lot of what was going on because of that. But the strength that some of these folks drew from prayer and from an absolute faith in a divine presence was something I found exhilarating and mystifying in equal measure. And I found myself asking, why do people believe in these unprovable, invisible forces? And then on the other hand, why can't I? Because they seem to draw such joy from it. So after my gap year, I fulfilled my part of that bargain with my parents, and I went to a public university. I went to Penn State. And it was a good thing that I did, because that's where I met my wife, Eve. And we were married under the care of State College Friends Meeting, the first wedding in the brand new meeting house that they built. I had some goofy little jobs, but then I ended up getting an internship for 1 year at the American Friends Service Committee. And that also was life-changing. Not everything was perfect at that place, and still isn't, but I saw close up a blend of Quaker witness and the committed and tireless activism of non-Quakers, whose passion for justice in all its forms stemmed from a God concept that was very different than the Quakers, or often enough completely absent. And the other thing they all shared, it seemed, was that hard, practical streak that even the most mystical Quakers are known for, that enables us to get things done. Considering all the different things that AFSC was trying to do, that was an invaluable quality in everyone who worked there. So as I said, that was only a 1-year appointment. I was a writer. I wrote project descriptions for the international division. And I stayed in Philadelphia and for another 17 years. I joined Chestnut Hill Friends Meeting, which was a wonderful meeting. And I was on the school committee of Plymouth Meeting Friends, which is where we sent our daughter for her early years. And I was on the committee for Philadelphia Yearly Meeting to revise Faith and Practice. And eventually, excuse me, eventually I became the clerk of that committee. And I learned a little bit from being clerk of the committee, but not nearly as much as I learned from just watching my predecessor as clerk, who was the incomparable Art Larrabee. And if you want to know how to be a Quaker clerk, take his workshop. It's quite remarkable. And as I was talking about earlier, before we really started, my career was in fundraising. I went from AFSC to a management consulting firm where I worked for a number of years, and then from there to the Historical Society of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, and from there to Penn. That career, which was very fulfilling. Some Quakers pride themselves on comforting the afflicted. I went the other way. I afflicted the comfortable. And it was a fine career that eventually brought me back to State College and to Penn State. I agreed to be the assistant clerk of the local Friends retirement community here, with the understanding that that did not automatically make me the next clerk. But it did. I was clerk of Foxdale Village for 2 or 3 years, I suppose. I also had the great joy of serving as clerk of our monthly meeting, State College monthly meeting, for 5 years. So I approached the subject of Quaker decision-making with an understanding of how this process is divinely led, but without the personal experience of that divinity. I can't say it's a fulfilling place to be, but at least it puts me in harmony with those who are drawn by Quaker activism, but are far from being on board with Quaker mysticism. And if you did read the pamphlet, those of you who did, you'll know why I think that this is important. Because it will be an increasingly secular population that fills the boards of our Quaker institutions in the future. The fastest growing religion in this country right now is none. And we will increasingly, by we, I mean the Quaker institutions, we will need the wisdom and energy of the people in our community who doubt or deny any type of divinity, but they want to help. At the same time, no Friends organization is going to want to give up the spirit-led process that has served them so well for so long. So that's a bit of a quandary. And I was actually kind of surprised when I queried Pendle Hill to see if anyone had done something like this already, because I will admit I wasn't routinely reading all the Pendle Hill pamphlets. But I got an answer back, and I have to give a big shout out to Janaki Spikar-Keeler at Pendle Hill, because she, first of all, said, no, there isn't one of these. Why don't you write one? And then after I had, proceeded to make it much, much better with her comments and suggestions. And so for better or worse, here's the Atheist Guide to Quaker Process. So I'll begin with the title. The Atheist Guide is meant to be provocative. It's not meant to leave anyone out. And I hope that believers can enjoy it just as much. And Within the essay, I don't use the word atheist. I use the word non-theist. And that's partly because that's already a term in general use among friends who have these kinds of conversations. I'm only now realizing how many of those friends there are and how many of those conversations are going on all the time. But then also because there seem to be almost as many ways to not believe in God as to believe in God. So non-theists. I don't know if you can be a non-theist and a Quaker at the same time. I know they haven't thrown me out yet, and they're probably not going to. But it's the subject of many a discussion, and I'm actually not trying to be part of that discussion. What I'm interested in is, can you be a non-theist and use a process that is originally rooted in faith in God? And obviously, I think you can. I start off the pamphlet by saying that it's a document for non-Quakers who are involved in Quaker institutions. Now, every writer experiences regret the minute they have the finished published piece in their hands, and I'm no exception. And I'm realizing that might have been off-putting because I want Quakers to read it. I want believers to read it. Nevertheless, though, the primary audience is people who are probably unlike most of you on this call. I'm guessing most of you are Quakers, or you're quite familiar with our ways. But so just for this evening, for a few minutes, try to take the perspective of someone who's not. Imagine that you have thrown your lot in with a bunch of Quakers because they're doing something that you believe in and that you care about. And the key word here is that they're doing, not that they're believing. And maybe you do respect the way they go about making decisions, and maybe you're even happy to be part of it. But you're not a believer, and nor are you a hypocrite. So my premise is that you can call on some of the finest qualities of the human spirit, and that without pretense or hypocrisy, you can make this work. And then I go on about a lot of the nuts and bolts, which I won't really get into here. But I have to acknowledge, as a non-theist, that it's obvious to me that faith gives strength. And that's been proven over and over again with excellent outcomes and with awful ones. Because I'm an evolutionist, I see the roots of the God meme in terms of survival value. If your prehistoric tribe believed in some sort of deity, and it doesn't matter what kind, then those who invoked that deity could elicit effort and sacrifice from members of the tribe on behalf of the tribe that ordinary mortal leaders probably couldn't do, no matter how impressive they were. And that effort and that sacrifice gave your tribe a slight edge. And a slight edge is all evolution ever needs. So we're all descended, effectively, from believers. And we all carry that tendency somewhere in us. And it has found expression in innumerable ways, including, and of particular interest to us, of course, the unique set of principles and practices that are embodied in the Society of Friends. Yes, I'm reading, in case you wondered. I'm not doing this off the cuff. So the effectiveness of these principles and these practices when it comes to group decision making, I think cannot be overstated. It generally results in decisions that are farsighted and wise and humane and quite practical. I know some of you right now are saying, not always, and you're right, it's true. But I maintain that that strength comes not because we're finding God in each other, but because we're looking. We're valuing each other, not evaluating each other. How can I look for God in you without getting at least a slightly better look at the human being who's in there. And at the same time, I'm looking away from myself, if only for a moment. And I think it's this refocusing away from self that accounts for much of the effectiveness of Quaker process. The believers will say it works because they're seeking God's will. And parenthetically, this always makes me wonder, how can God have will? If you stand outside of time, if you know the future, will, the whole concept of will depends on not knowing the future. So that's another conversation. But the point is that they are consciously setting aside their own wills. They're saying, I've already surrendered, not to you, but to God. And so this isn't a fight. And the debating and voting, the Robert's Rules of Order model, is a metaphorical battlefield. And you use arguments instead of weapons. But Quakers did not reject literal weapons only to replace them with verbal ones. We start by giving up. And the only outcome we allow ourselves to wish for at the beginning is unity at the end. Take away the need to win, I think, and that releases tension. And that release allows all manner of creative solutions to emerge. And I think that is at the heart of the genius of this process. I then go on at some length about the virtues we need to bring to the gathering: respect, integrity, courage, compassion, mindfulness, patience, lots and lots of patience. And then finally, vitally, I think that might just be the class clown in me talking, a sense of humor. I think a sense of humor helps you refocus, gives you new perspective. It releases tension. It's valuable only for that, but beyond that, it simply changes the way you think. And I'd be wary of any decision that was reached without any laughter involved. So not one of these qualities is divine. These are all human. They're the very best of human qualities, but they're human, and they're all part of the human spirit. And to make this process work, I think that they are all we need. And that's my sermon. And I'm out of things to say, so I'm really counting on you guys from this point on.
Thank you, Selden. That was really interesting. And even though I've read the book, I felt like there was a lot that got me thinking. And now we'd like to open it to questions from the audience. And we also have some individuals who, when they registered, gave questions. So I don't know if you would like to start with any of those, or maybe we'll start with whoever wants to ask a question. I would appreciate it if you would raise your hand electronically. If you go to the bottom of it, should be on the bottom of your screen. There's a thing that says reactions, and it has a little smiley face. If you click reactions, there's someplace there where you can raise, it says raise hand. If you'll see there, I just raised my hand. And that puts you on the screen so we can all see that you have your hand raised. And here we go. Michael Inskeep has a hand raised. Thank you.
Just beware. I can't see. I can only see like 4 people.
Okay. Yeah, I'm monitoring.
Luckily, Michael is one of them. So
yes. So you need to unmute to ask your question.
So I was wondering how the dynamic between you as a non-theist and theists who are participating in a meeting that you're clerking works.
This is going to sound odd, but it doesn't really come up. We're focused on a problem or a solution. I'm trying to listen. I'm trying to discern the sense of the meeting. I'm trying to find words for it. And most of the time, I don't actually know what people's beliefs are. And I've clerked, as I said, I've clerked the meeting. I've also clerked a blended board of friends and non-friends. And I haven't found a lot of, I couldn't tell you from what the people are saying, whether they're, if I didn't already know, whether they're the friends or the non-friends, and what their belief system is all about. I heard somebody say once, and I really liked this. They said, and I'm sorry I can't give attribution, but they said, when somebody says, "Do you believe in God?" what they're really saying is, "Do you believe in God the way I believe in God?" And as a result, the answer is always no.
Okay, we have Jean Athy has a hand up.
Please.
Hi. So when people in a Quaker meeting talk about spirit-led, that kind of thing, how do you react to that? I mean, and for example, this meeting, why didn't we start with a moment of silence? And what does that mean? What does that mean to people who like me are non-theist?
Uh-huh. I love the moment of silence. I do. And I think that the question of sort of how I respond when people speak out of what is clearly a belief in a divine spirit, I just listen. I mean, I'm not going to argue. They do me the courtesy of not trying to convince me, and I return that that courtesy. And one of the things I think in the moment of silence is actually, I think, one of the things that the non-Quakers who serve on our boards get right away, and use, I think, as a time of focusing and thinking. Who knows? It might be the only moment of silence some people get in their whole day. But I'm not answering your question very well. But I have always been very happy to let people believe what they believe, and focus on what they do, how they treat other people. The Quakers certainly don't have a monopoly on working for justice and peace, and I would go so far as to say that theists don't either.
Thank you.
Okay, I see that somebody clapped. I've never seen that in the chat box before. Do we have other questions? Yes, Ralph, please go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Ralph.
Okay, I was having trouble with my audio, that's why. It seems to me, or for me, being non-theist is not a rejection of spirit or the spiritual. I'm deeply involved in spiritual work, and yet I'm a non-theist. I still believe there's a spiritual aspect to life. even if I don't believe there's a being God. Any response to that?
No, I'm right there with you. I think that let's see. Let me back up here a little bit. There have been so many very wise people, very wise and very sane people who report these profound religious experiences. And I can't discount that. And there's so many, it's almost like a data set. And I feel like I have to find the theory that encompasses the data points. And what we don't know is just how deep the human spirit goes. You know, we live at the very tip top of our consciousnesses most of the time. Every once in a while, we get a glimpse of something that's very deep. And I think it quite possible that the depth within us contains such power and such love that we are in touch with so rarely. We don't really know it. We don't really understand it. And how would we know it's not divine? If it's beyond our comprehension. I mean, that seems to be one of the reasons people believe in the first place, is there's so much that's beyond their comprehension. And I think a lot of what's beyond our comprehension is right within ourselves. That doesn't mean it comes from some other place than ourselves. It just means there's a lot more to us than we're generally aware of. I mentioned in the pamphlet that, you know, people go into deep meditative states. People take psychedelic drugs. People find depth to themselves beyond their ego that is just overwhelming. And I think whatever we can do to get in touch with that is a spiritual journey. It just doesn't necessarily, and no one can prove to me yet, anyway, that it comes from an external source. Only that the internal source may be far more profound than we generally understand.
Thank you.
You know, there's a comment from somebody who I think did not come but registered, who said it would be a good thing if it was more widely understood that not having a belief in a deity does not preclude a life of honesty, fairness, and morality.
I saw that one. Yes. I'm sorry. I can't look at that spreadsheet and be on this at the same time. So
no, that's fine. That's why I brought it up. I thought that was a very good comment.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and it's true. And you know, there's the Freedom from Religion Foundation. There's a lot of very well organized non-theists. As I said, it's the fastest growing religion. And, you know, they're as ethical as you and me, and just as concerned with human welfare. So I think that's one of the reasons people see that. You know, people look at, well, here's what these people are doing who profess to not believe in God. Here's what these people are doing who profess to believe in God. Let's judge by what they're actually doing, and the non-theists are doing just as well. So I think that might be behind some of the popularity of it.
We have another question that came in the registration, and I'm not sure if that person is here, but he or she was curious about how friends have applied Quaker discernment principles in their workplaces in non-theist ways.
Um, I I can't speak from personal experience on that. In my workplace, I always just tried to do what was honest and right and would get the job done, ideally without hurting anyone's feelings, although I'm sure I failed at that often enough. I know others, a friend of mine in my meeting is a department head and runs his department meetings as if they were, sense of the meeting gatherings, as if they were business meetings. And I'm sure there are examples of that all over.
I think there's, I follow things on LinkedIn, and what I see is there's a lot more, there's a lot of emphasis on good bosses, bad bosses, how you manage discussions in the workplace. And so I see a lot of emphasis lately on the ideal workplace is collaborative, kind, encouraging. There are a lot of like good Quaker principles being espoused about how you would run things in a workplace.
Yeah, I see that too. I mean, there are folks who have worked for Quakers who would tell you they're not the best bosses. So it's not, there's nothing automatic there.
Right. We have a question from Michael.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I think your lecture was awesome. It's put into perspective things for me. I consider myself a non-theistic friend, but I think back to when I was theistic, or I always thought that maybe all life collectively made up God. But anyway, I used to sit in meeting, and rather than hold things in light or pray, I would ask, because I figure God always knows my needs. Hey, what do you want me to do? But how to reinterpret that in a non-theistic way has been a bit of a challenge for me. And you actually kind of articulated, or someone in the group did as well, but articulated that we're looking for the best in ourselves and the best in other human beings, and how we can come to consensus and unity, because we're walking into this thing with an open mind, without, like you said, not wanting to win. And these are all things that are important. So you've given me some new perspective and some new thoughts along this, and I appreciate that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. One of the lines I'm proud of in the pamphlet is bring your best self, not your best game. Because I think people are very used to, entering a discussion, with the intention of winning, and you got to bring your best game. And your best self might get sacrificed along the way.
Very, very true. Very, very true.
Do we have more questions from the audience? Yes, Michael and Frank. Michael, would you like to go first?
So do you want to talk a little bit about the difference between consensus and unity?
Sure. Even Quakers talk about consensus when it's not what they mean. And non-Quakers do it all the time. They say, "Oh, you make decisions by consensus," and sometimes it's just too much trouble to explain the difference, and you let it go by. But I think that consensus is a secular process. It is a breeding ground for compromise. Some people say that we reached consensus, everyone is equally unhappy, and maybe just to put it briefly, that's the difference with unity. Maybe everybody's not happy, but they are in unity. They will be part of the decision, unless if they block the way, if they stand aside, I talk about that in the pamphlet too. And to this crowd, it's probably not necessary, but if someone is really feeling out of unity with the group to the extent that they want to block an action from happening, they have to endure a barrage of loving inquiry into the basis of that action. And most people are not willing to do that. But I think, you can have people disagree and still have the meeting be in unity. And I don't know that you could say that about consensus. Was that sort of what you were after?
Thanks.
Okay.
Okay, we have Frank who has a question.
This is in response or off the remarks earlier made by Ralph. One of the things that I've experienced as a friend is that when I am with other people, many of them friends, but not necessarily all, and we're in what, for lack of a better term, would be a worshipful moment, that I think that on some level, this is being generated by our presence and some kind of internal activity that relates us spiritually. And I wish I could articulate this more effectively, but I'm not suggesting that this is caused by some manipulator in the sky who's doing these things, but that it's simply part of the human nature that when we are willing to sit down quietly amongst one another, that we experience something that could be called a religious experience, for lack of a better term, but it isn't necessarily related to a God. And I think that, I don't know how many others have experienced that, but I know that there have been times in Quaker gatherings where the sense of spirit amongst us has been very strong. And I've found that personally very meaningful.
Thank you. I'm going to read one of the last paragraphs in the pamphlet for you, and my apologies to those of you who already read it. But Frank, you just hit this so closely, that the Latin roots of the word religion do not actually lead to any kind of God concept. Rather, religare means to tie fast or to bind up into a bundle. To me, this evokes two images. There is myself, an individual trying to bind a disorganized mass of thoughts, feelings, instincts, and impulses into a coherent, purposeful whole. And there is us, a group of ordinary people who can, by binding to one another with intention, achieve extraordinary things. In both of these senses of religare, the non-theist can be as religious as anyone else. Bill, you want to go?
Thank you, clerk. Old habit. Thank you, Selden. I am enjoying this discussion. I too came to a meeting because of what I saw Quakers do, and also by some of the discussions that esteemed friends had. It really drew me. I'm a recovering Roman Catholic, so I was jettisoning an awful lot from years back, so to speak. But my question is particular from what we're discussing about the nitty-gritty, because I've learned from other non-theists some of the practices they do. I'm a co-clerk in one committee right now, and some of that nitty-gritty is to reframe words and phrases that are using so they don't gut punch me. It's certainly not like they used to a few years back, where friends would start out, well, I think otherwise in this, and I feel led to say blah, blah, blah. And so I really go through a quick process in my head now. It's almost subconscious, where I quickly rewrite that line as just something like, well, I'm uncomfortable. I really need a further understanding of this. I'm just not in unity there yet with you. I do that kind of thing. Is that something you can speak to or talk about?
I'll try. I have gotten, I almost don't hear it anymore. People say I'm led when they mean I wanna. And I'm thinking, well, if it's a leading, test it. That's what you do with leadings. You gather a few people around you and you talk to them about it. Like I said, that one's just gotten so common. I don't hear it. I was in a discussion a little while ago, and I think I had used the word holy, HOLY. And I wanted to evoke something that was that special. And someone sort of called me on it. So you're using religious language as a non-theist. I said, well, the words we have are the words we have. And that somehow that just, that word nailed it at that moment for me. But when I do hear people using explicit language, I just try to hear it the way they meant it. That people talk about being saved, for example. And I'm not even sure how I feel about the Messiah. So how can I know, or how can I have any inkling of what they mean when they say that? But so often, they so sincerely mean it as a compliment that if they say they think you're saved, I can't just say, oh, well, I think that's a bunch of hogwash. Don't talk that way to me. I obviously, this means something to them, and they're sharing that with me. And I think I try to meet them where they are. Like I said, I'm not trying to convert anyone to non-theism.
I'm going to interject. I have to. I'm sorry, but that actually ties to Paul, the apostle. Didn't he say, "I have become all things to all people"? It was just funny that struck me. But that was a very good point and very well made.
I'm glad someone here has a biblical education, because I don't.
I think in Quaker decision making, we often talk about discernment. And I've always felt a little confused about what we mean by that. And I think it doesn't figure much in your pamphlet either.
No, you're right. You're right. I do think I think it's a skill that does not require belief in the divine. It's probably mostly listening. And who was it who said hearing where the words come from? One of those early Quakers put it that way, and that always spoke to me. Some people just have a way of knowing, no matter what you're saying, even you might be saying the opposite of what you're feeling or meaning, and there are some people who just understand it anyway. And I think those are people of great discernment. I don't claim to be one of them. When I don't understand somebody, I generally ask them to say it again.
Yeah, sorry, I'm looking to the side here because I have a side monitor, but I'll put in the chat box. I'm looking at the PYM, Philadelphia Yearly Meeting, information about discernment, clearness, and decision-making. And it says in the preamble, Friends use discernment processes to gain clarity and support for personal leadings, to test a corporate leading to act as a community, and to seek unity in meeting matters. For Friends, discernment is the act of searching for truth, remaining open to light beyond the self. Friends have faith that for those who question and seek, there is always a way forward. So I feel this is leading back into a very spiritual basis for decision making. And I'm finding when I'm in mixed groups, there's often a way of putting off a decision by saying, let's seek discernment. So I don't know if you or anybody else here would like to comment on that aspect.
I don't know. I love that term though, light beyond the self,
Yeah,
because I think that's really key. And I do talk about it in the pamphlet, is trying to look away from yourself and get past yourself and get over yourself. That light, as I said, I mean, that light may be deep within you. That doesn't make it any less illuminating. It doesn't make it any less energizing. But it's true that if you just sit there and listen to yourself talk, you're probably not gonna find it. I would like to do some more thinking about and reading about discernment and what it really means.
I see a couple of hands raised. Anne, would you like to go first, please?
Sure. Invoking Arthur Larrabee again. I remember 5 or 6 years ago, Arthur came to State College and did a series of workshops. He did one for the boards of Foxdale and State College Friends School, one for the faculty and staff, and one for the meeting. And I ended up going to both the one for the board and the meeting one, and was really struck by how differently he presented the whole process. And rather than calling it spirit-led, he focused on the energy of the group. You're using the term energized at the end there, Selden. That really made me think of that. But yeah, that seemed to work pretty well for the people of other faiths, no faiths, and non-theists in the group. With the meeting, he did talk more about spirit, but to me, as a non-theist, it's kind of neat to see them as being a little bit interchangeable.
Well, yes, as I said, and he is, just as an example, I mean, he really did have that gift of discernment. I remember sitting in committee meetings, and we were writing by committee, and you all know how awful that can be. But he would hear this input from people of, both in terms of the wordsmithing that we were doing and in terms of the concepts that were behind it. And he'd sort of hear everyone around the room and then think for a moment and come out with something that really expressed what we were after. And that's not just good writing. That's I think that really is a kind of a spiritual gift.
I see, Frank, you have your hand up again?
You're muted, Frank.
Yeah, you're muted.
That's fine. I don't mean to monopolize the conversation, but I'm a retired psychologist, and I used to work with another man who was originally trained by the Jesuits, and he was training to be a priest, and he later left to become a psychotherapist. And certainly there are parallels in those two professions, but nonetheless, he talked about the fact that when he was trained, he had a priest who told his students, remember, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. And consequently, you know where the emphasis needs to be. And I think that from the standpoint of discernment, it's a really good thing to remember is that we need to listen more and speak less. And I've never forgotten him saying that. It just hit a responsive chord in my head as far as it being good advice and given in a rather gentle way, actually, considering the other options. So.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the magical things about a friends meeting is that everyone is just sitting there and listening. And, you know, it's listening. It's usually silent. We've all been in popcorn meetings, so we know it's not always that way. But how many times in your week do you just sit there with a group of people and not talk, but listen? I sometimes picture a meeting for worship, and you can say the same thing about a business meeting. That it's like a garden, and most of the time you're not the seed. Most of the time you're not the flower. Most of the time you're the soil. And even if you're just sitting there and not saying anything, you are enriching that experience. And you might be the seed and the soil twice, and you might go back and forth. I don't know, but that as a metaphor for what we do, that has just always appealed to me.
I was thinking there's a statement about coming with hearts and minds prepared. And I see in my experience in the business world and in various volunteer positions that I've held, that people chronically come unprepared for meetings. So your hearts and minds can't be prepared for decisions if you haven't even read the agenda. So it's kind of an art to bring people up to speed.
Well, I admit I've shown up to meeting any number of times when my heart and mind are not prepared. But I rationalize it. It's better than not showing up at all, and you never know. You never know what might happen.
Oh yeah, it's led to some interesting meetings. I don't know if we want to branch out into some of the comments that were made at registration. It's a little beyond the scope of what you were talking about. It's more about the concepts of being in the Quaker world as a non-theist, being accepted in your meeting if you're not religious. I don't know if people would like to discuss that.
I was probably last year, I think, but there was I forget who sponsored it now, but it was a Zoom session, and it included a non-theist friend who'd actually gotten a lot of grief from her meeting, and had to the point that people thought that she should leave the meeting. And I was flabbergasted to hear that. I could not imagine my meeting ever saying that to anyone. Of course, we're so small, we can't afford to lose anybody. But I think it all eventually worked out. But it just hearing about it left a bad taste in my mouth. So I can't speak to that out of any personal experience. I have never felt anything but loved and accepted by my meeting. I would be curious about if the people who actually posted that wanted to expand on it.
Well, you see, we have one hand up. Ellen, would you like to speak?
Yes. I'm thinking this is like an AA meeting, and it's time for me to say I'm a non-theist.
Hi, Ellen.
and I own it. And the reason I'm here is actually, I grew up in media, which has the great beauty of having multiple friends meetings. And all of my school chums in the public school in a gifted class were Quakers, and they were wonderful, and they stayed in the public school. They did not go off to Quaker schools. And so I benefited from that tremendously. But I grew up Lutheran, where as a musician, Bach is God. So I am so glad that that was the case for me as a musician. But I was directed to this meeting, to this Zoom session tonight by the Philadelphia Quarter, because I am going to be accepted as the treasurer of the Philadelphia Quarterly meeting. And I am not a member of Friends. And I moved here from North Jersey, where I attended right after 9/11 for 20 years, not 20, 18 years. And I was the treasurer for 9, and they loved it. And they had to, accept me, especially because I was not a member. And so I started going to Quaker meeting in college. It was during Vietnam, and there was a wonderful academic-led meeting at Bucknell. And, I bet those profs, it was mostly profs, hardly any students, were probably not theists, but they were activists and pacifists. And I don't know if you know Yule Gibbons.
I know of Yule Gibbons, absolutely.
Right. Clerk of the meeting. Never a silent meeting. At 5 minutes to timeout, he would start on a long story, and it was a wonderful thing. And so then I fell away from it, but I immediately returned after 9/11. And so I feel strongly about that I have the sensitivities to make my way with Friends. And I believe that my participation in the groups are quite sought after. And in fact, I have been importuned many times to become a member. And what I feel is that I feel like I would be imposing my non-theism on the meeting were they to, accept. I mean, I feel accepted there. I feel like it's some kind of violation for me to impose myself on them. So it's this, and so anyway, at the kind of early in the discussion with the Philadelphia Quarter, I said, well, you might be concerned that I'm not a member. There was a couple of weeks of silence. an email and somebody came back and said, oh, yeah. So anyway, it's very interesting that the timing of this, of your session came up, and this is a wonderful thing. And I didn't get to read the pamphlet, but I will. But I just wanted to say that for me, I have this kind of sense of that I would not impose myself on the group.
No, I understand that. Yeah. I don't tend to talk about matters of faith with other than friends, really, and not all that much then. I'm always afraid it's going to derail the conversations. Like we're talking about something else, and I don't want to get into your Lutheranism or your Catholicism or your Judaism or whatever you're coming from, unless this is explicitly what we came to talk about, which it usually is. We came to talk about something we're going to do.
We have a hand up from Ralph.
Yeah.
In response to acceptance of non-theists within Quakers, I was not a non-theist when I came to Quakers in 1999. I'm a Presbyterian preacher's kid. I'd been a Presbyterian for 50 years when I came to Quakers, and later became a non-theist, and I'm a full member of Minneapolis meeting. And actually, we have 2 meetings every Sunday, unprogrammed and semi-programmed. Semi-programmed is quite rare, but you have hymns and an assigned speaker for a very brief period. And I was actually asked to speak on my non-theism as the assigned speaker at a semi-programmed meeting. And afterwards, as I was moving around with people, there were a number of people who came up and nudged me like, I'm with you. Like, I don't want to say it too loudly, but yeah, I'm there too. And I think there are more non-theists in Quakerism than we imagine.
Well, one of the points I do make in the pamphlet is that I've never been part of another religion, so I don't really know how it works, but I am pretty sure that there are non-believers in every pew of every church. But our meetings for worship, unprogrammed meetings for worship, don't ask anyone to recite prayers that they don't believe in, or say things that they don't believe in. So I think to that extent, we're probably a somewhat more comfortable place than your average church with the sermons and the sacraments and all that stuff.
I'm not sure if everyone here belongs to an unprogrammed meeting, because geographically I see we're pretty diverse tonight. And there are meetings that do have more ritual. They have somebody who's in effect a preacher, a sermon. So that may be a little different for some of us. And I don't know if anybody's interested in commenting on that. One of the questions prior to tonight was, how is the culture in the Philadelphia area? Because we have somebody here who's new to this geographic area and came from an area where non-theist friends were totally accepted without question and were actually members of meetings. And I know in Barnegat, we accept everybody. We don't question what your beliefs are. You know, if you come and you'd like to worship with us, anybody can walk in the door, and we welcome with open arms anybody who comes. And we never ask, really, what people's beliefs are if they come to worship with us.
Mhm.
Yes, Bill?
I feel very fortunate here in Tucson, Arizona, that I just stumbled into our meeting, and it's an unprogrammed meeting, and it was very welcoming, which is probably why I stayed. I've been there about 6 years. They haven't kicked me out yet, so. But I found that as well. I was really surprised, as I say, coming from years back of well, it was my lifetime, but I've aged with the gray hair, so it isn't all my lifetime, but it felt like a lifetime of Roman Catholicism. It was, cradle to grave. I was a birthright Roman Catholic, if you can say that. But in any case, stumbling into this meeting was just so eye-opening to see people just so accepting from all different backgrounds. I was not unique in coming from RC. We have lots of friends that I would describe as non-theist, although I haven't heard them describe themselves. They come from other traditions, from Jewish traditions, from Buddhists, from no religious background at all. And often in discussion, again, I feel great relief as well as being blessed, if I can use that term. There again, speaking of terms, Selden, that creep in, that these people are so accepting and also seeking a lot of the things I was seeking. They were looking for a community of people that were concerned about the wider community. And they were less concerned about what everyone's individual belief was. Now, that's not to say that there aren't some very devout Christians in meeting, but that doesn't seem to be, well, at least in my experience, as a regular business meeting at Tinder, etc., it doesn't seem to be the focus of the meeting at all, thankfully. And being on the communications committee, so I deal with a lot of the computer infrastructure and stuff. There's more concern about personal pronouns than whether a friend is a member or an attender, put it that way. So, we're doing what we can to make sure the directory has space for personal pronouns. And that to me just speaks volumes about where the meeting is. And I guess another is is that just recently, before the pandemic, we went through lots of, air quotes, discernment about switching our bathrooms to being gender neutral. And we came out of that in unity, and they did so. So looking back, that's all. I just thinking of off the top of my head. That's another great example. Good meeting, Team of Friends meeting, Tucson.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, we've been making trouble with pronouns ever since the thee and thou days, haven't we?
Yes. It's about 20 after 8. So I'm wondering if there are any last questions. If not, we'll wrap up. I'm enjoying this and I could stay for a long time.
Well, I want to say thank you again for inviting me. I've really had a great time this evening. And I forget who it was who regretted that we didn't open with a moment of silence, but I imagine we could close with one.
Of course.